Welcome to The Successful Encore Career, a podcast of employment for seniors. I'm Brett Johnson. This episode is brought to you by Nationwide Insurance, Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging, and InnoSource. As always, with me is Carol Ventresca, Executive Director with Employment for Seniors.
Hi, Brad. How are you doing today?
Great.
Good. Well, we've got a really exciting program today. Our guest is Ted Fireman, and we are really excited about this discussion we're going to have with Ted regarding FranNet, which assists those interested in purchasing a franchise, as well as Ted's own career story. So, Ted, you've got a varied background, not just in franchising, but in fundraising, education, consulting. So why don't you give a little bit of some highlights on your background and how you came in to pursue franchising as a career track?
Well, thanks for having me. I have had a varied career, but most of it has really been in the in business or in the corporate environment. Even when I was doing capital campaign fundraising, I really was doing that working directly with corporations and businesses. Mm-hmm. And so most of my years have been in that business and corporate environment. In my case, it was after the third layoff in my mid-50s when I finally started to kind of get it that corporate America was done with me. I should have probably realized it sooner, and each downsizing or layoff or right-sizing or whatever you want to call it seems like lasted a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. 3 or 4 months the first time, 6 months the second time, 9 months the third time. And, in between, I was able to find jobs, but they didn't last long. My new jobs averaged about 2 years before I was laid off again. And it took me a while to kind of get it that maybe it was time to make a change. And at that point, I began to look at business ownership and actually talk to somebody about franchise ownership. And I realized that I became very interested in the process that individual was having me go through to learn about franchises. And instead of choosing a franchise, I actually got involved in that business, which is kind of a franchise about franchising. It's a franchise that helps other people to find a franchise.
Right.
So let's go overview what franchising is. I mean, is it different than being an entrepreneur?
In some ways, I don't think it's different at all. Business ownership is business ownership. Okay. I think that sometimes I tell people that it's entrepreneurship with a safety net.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is that you're not off on your own inventing the wheel or reinventing the wheel. You're working with a company that has a track record, and they have a proven system for doing business, whether it's their marketing or their accounting or their sales or their HR, their technology. They've done it 10, 50, maybe 1,000 times, depending on the franchise. So you're getting training and support, and you're not off on your own. And all of those systems are critical to your success, all of those business systems. So whether you get them through a franchise or you try to go out and figure it out on your own, you need those systems. And so in my mind, to be able to avoid the mistakes that we all make, you're able to, in effect, buy a system that's already been proven and then get the training and support to be successful.
Okay.
That leads us right into my next question, Ted. This is wonderful because one of my concerns with a client who comes in and says, I can't find what I want. Corporate America's done with me. But I don't have a hobby that I can create a business or an interest that I can create a business, so I don't really see my opportunities out there. So my question to you is kind of twofold. It sounds like you're saying franchising is a great opportunity because there is a support system and a proven track record behind you. But what type of client, what type of individual is the best kind of franchisor? Who does this well, and what are kind of the steps?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I don't know if there's one answer to it. I think there's some misperceptions that we all have. One of them is that entrepreneurs are risk takers. That we read about Bill Gates and we read about Elon Musk and these people that risk everything and invent some incredible technology while they're living in their parents' garage or something.
Right.
We don't read about the people that are still living in their parents' garage. We hear only about the success stories. And most people, particularly I think the older entrepreneur, and when I say older, I mean 40s and 50s, I don't think a lot of them don't have that one big idea that's going to change the world, but they've got a lot of experience from jobs that they've had in the past and from the corporate world, and they have a lot of skills to run a business if they can find that right business.
Right.
And I think with franchising, it's really the idea behind it really is mitigating risk, not taking risk.
Oh, good point. Okay.
And you have an opportunity to do a level of research that you cannot do if you're starting a business,
right,
or if you're buying a business. And example of that, if your interest was in owning a dry cleaner, and you go to the neighborhood dry cleaner because it's for sale, and you go and you're interested in buying Sam's dry cleaner, you can only talk to Sam.
Right.
If you're interested in buying a franchised dry cleaning operation, you have the opportunity not only to talk to the franchise company, but you can talk to every single owner throughout the country if you choose to. And I've had clients that have talked to 50 owners to really find out what the owner is doing to be successful, what they would do differently. They validate whether the franchise company has provided the support that they promised. So you have the ability to do a level of research that I think helps you to manage the risks.
So it sounds like, as I always tell clients who are job hunting, do your homework. Really know the company you're looking at, understand the job requirements, take the time to do your homework, because then you're going to be more satisfied with that job that you've gotten. So it sounds like good franchise, those who have potential as a franchisee, have to be really good researchers. They really have to be willing to spend the time to get that information. Can you think of any other traits that individual has that could have that would be to their advantage?
Yeah. Well, just to pick up on something you said for a second, I think in a lot of ways, with a franchise, you probably have a chance to learn more about it in advance than even most jobs.
Right.
I know from my own past experience, I never had the chance to talk to the person that used to have that job. They're typically not available. So it's,
right.
I think it's pretty hard in a lot of cases to really get an honest assessment of what that job is going to be. When you go talk to a lot of franchise owners that have been doing that business for a number of years, they don't have anything to sell you. They're going to tell you the truth about the business, what's good about it, what's not good about it, and you really have a chance to dig in and as you said, do your homework. Other things that I think franchise companies are looking for, surprisingly, they usually do not want prior industry experience. They don't want to have you unlearn bad habits. They want you to be able to follow a system.
Interesting.
So they want people that are communicative, that have a general business knowledge, that are comfortable and enjoy working with people, but they don't necessarily have to have prior experience. Ultimately, they have to do their homework and then decide that they can follow a system. Most franchise companies say that there's two reasons that people fail. Number one being they don't follow the system. They decide after weeks or months that they know more than the franchise company knows, so they start doing things their own way and they get in trouble. Maybe they stop doing the marketing, or maybe they try to cut corners, and that's a recipe for failure. The other one is lack of capital. And to some degree, I blame both the franchise company and the individual, because if they do their homework properly, they're going to understand how much capital they need going in. And one of the worst things in the world, if you ever have to go back to the bank after you've received a loan and say, I was off a little bit, I need a little more money, they're not very happy to hear that.
Right.
So you need to know in front exactly how much capital.
Wonderful. Okay.
Well, that's probably a good segue into this next thought is, what franchise do I want to buy? So how do your clients find that right franchise, or even walking into this idea of a franchise? And are some considered hot or recession proof as well?
Yeah. Well, I get the question a lot, what franchises are hot? And
if that's the right term to say about it, I guess, or popular, or I guess maybe more should be, is it available?
That's another question.
Yeah.
But typically, when people ask me what's hot, I'll usually tell them, whatever you think is hot is probably what you should avoid.
Oh, wow!
Because we don't want to. At least our FranNet's philosophy is not to look at what is trendy, but to look at what is supported by major demographic trends. And where I'm differentiating is that, you remember not long ago, everybody was opening muffin shops, and they're gone.
Right.
And about every 10 years, frozen yogurt is in every strip center. Now you can't find it again. Right now, an example of something that might be trendy is these expensive gourmet donuts with bacon, with all kinds of stuff. And a few people will do very well, but everybody will jump in, and then the fad will pass, and a lot of people, I think, will lose money. So we like to focus on things that people need, not just things that are faddish or trendy, but things that people need and will pay for day after day. I mentioned dry cleaning before. It's a boring business. And I'll tell people sometimes, you want a boring business that's going to make you very successful. But it's things people will pay for every day. It might be that dry cleaner. It might be house painting. It might be house cleaning. It might be services for seniors. If somebody mom or dad needs help at home, they or their adult kids are going to find a way to pay for it. It's not an option. They have to have it. If your car breaks down, you have to have a car to get to work. You're going to pay for the repairs. So there are certain industries that I think are, if not recession proof, they're at least recession resistant. Another example is in education. If your son or daughter is struggling in school, that makes the whole family miserable. The child is miserable. The family is impacted by that. So mom and dad will pay for tutoring to get that child back up to where they need to be in algebra, geometry, reading, whatever it is. So tutoring businesses have been very stable and successful for a long time.
Interesting. So I realize you may not be able to give me specific, name of a company and how much it costs, but can you give us kind of a ballpark range of what a franchise would cost?
Yeah, I don't know if this will be helpful, but there are franchises from under $50,000 total cost to millions of dollars.
Right.
I guess I would say if you ask what would be kind of a typical or sweet spot, it might be $75,000 to $250,000. There's a lot. I would say 50% of franchises fall in that range, and within that, usually the individual is investing about 25 to 33% of their own money.
Okay, good
so if
question.
the business is $100,000, they're going to probably put 25 to 35,000 of their own in, and then they can be considered for a loan. Often it's an SBA-backed loan, and there's other types of financing that have become popular, whether it's home equity, a variety of different ways that people finance businesses.
I have one additional question I want to ask, and it's not exactly about finances, sort of going back a little bit. One of the major things that we're hearing from employers is they can't find enough people to work for them. So does that question play into franchise? Are there franchises that you can purchase where you don't need to worry too much about the amount of labor?
Yeah, there are some franchises, of course. There's franchises pretty much in any business sector. So if you hear about a business that's struggling to find employees, there's probably a franchise in that industry, and they're probably having the same challenges. Mm-hmm. Now, the franchisor will tell you that they think they have some advantages because maybe they can present more of a career path to that individual than the independent business could. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're going to, because franchises tend to outperform independent businesses, they can attract people who aren't going to have to worry about being downsized or laid off in the future. But they're going to struggle as well when there's a labor shortage. I think certain businesses, different types of workers are needed, and the type of business maybe that employs more professionals or technicians might not have as much of a challenge as the business that needs more entry level and lower wage positions.
Okay.
And that's probably some of the research that should go in to that while you're looking, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of what the economy is like and kind of get a pulse on who's available, who's not available.
Absolutely.
At least in your city, in your DMA, as it were.
Yeah. And the franchise company is going to have its own techniques or methods to help their franchise owner find the right people. And they all sound great. But that's where that validation that I talked about before comes in. That second step, when the prospect has an opportunity to talk to individual owners and say, basically they can ask, is that working? Are you finding the people you need? Are the systems that the franchisor told you would make it easier to find a great manager or assistant manager or line workers, whatever, is that working for you? And what's your experience been? And I think that is really a great opportunity. I do want to say, though, the franchise, there's some misperceptions. I believe that any good franchisor, the franchise company, will be pretty straightforward with their prospects. There used to be this idea that franchises want to sell a franchise to anybody that can write a check. Mm-hmm. And if they're a decent franchise, that is not the case anymore, because they know that they're successful when their franchise owners are successful over a long period of time. And if you think about it, in the very beginning, when a business is new, that's the period where they're just growing and the revenue is at its lower point. So the franchise company is making less money. They're making what is called royalties, which is a monthly percentage of the gross revenue. But the business is brand new, so there aren't a lot of revenues, and therefore the royalties are pretty small. They want to find partners that are going to be very successful so that 2 and 3 years down the road, when that business is really doing great and its revenue is $1 million a year instead of $50,000 or $100,000 a year, then their royalty figure is much, much bigger. So it's important for them to find owners or partners that are really going to be successful. And the days of just selling a business to anybody that will write a check, I think they're gone. If you find a company that's too eager to get your check, then that's the kind of company you want to run away from, because you really, it's a kind of a mutual discovery process. The franchisor needs to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the prospect at the same time that prospect is trying to figure out if this is a good match for them.
Well, and I would think it would be to the advantage of the franchisor to really be careful, get really good people to be franchisees, because the bad publicity goes back on them.
It does.
The individual franchisee is going to disappear.
That's right. And then when the next prospect is validating and is making those calls, if they learn that there have been a number of franchise owners that have failed, that just completely, it's a cycle and it kills the process. Nobody wants to buy a business if they learn that people aren't successful.
Mm-hmm. Are there categories of franchises and do they differ in their success? I mean, I'm assuming there is probably the typical brick and mortar that we think of, but the service doesn't necessarily have to have brick and mortar, I should say. I mean, what are the success rates? Is there a different type of person that gravitates toward those types?
I think, of course, success rates vary, like every other business. The SBA says, Small Business Administration says that franchises succeed at a much higher rate. The numbers that they show are, after 5 years, less than 50% of independent businesses are still operating. The figure is 85% success rate for franchises. I think it goes back to some of the things we talked about, proven systems and a lot of support, but I think it's also the homework that goes in before you ever make that decision. A lot of people still make decisions for really, I think, kind of crazy ways. They may hear that their uncle in Florida has gotten rich because he opened some business, and they think, well, if he can do it, he's an idiot. I can do it too. So
There you go.
but the problem is they're two different people, and that business may work really great for the uncle in Florida and may be a disaster in Central Ohio. Right. Everybody's different. Every market is different, and people have to do their homework and do their research. You mentioned brick and mortar businesses. With any location-based business where there's bricks and mortar, you have some additional debt. It's just natural. You've got a lease to pay. You've had tenant improvements done, so you begin with that extra expense. So sometimes the lower cost, even home-based franchises can be quicker to ramp up and break even and become successful because they have less debt. I don't think there's really any one category that you can pick over another. But again, I would say it tends to be those things that are need-based that people will pay for over and over and over again because it's a need, not a want.
Right. Ted, let me ask a little bit more about something you just mentioned on home-based businesses, because we get a lot of clients who say, I just want to do something from my house. And a lot of companies are not comfortable with that with a new employee. They may give an employee they've had for a long time the ability to work from home, but they're not willing to do that for a new person. What are the kinds of franchises that you can purchase that you could work from home?
Well, work from home can be a kind of a tricky. It can be kind of interpreted a couple different ways. There are some businesses that can be home-based, meaning your office is in your home. But I would argue that they aren't really home-based in that you're not going to be successful if you're staying at home. Right. They tend to be businesses that may be more sales-oriented, so you have to be out in the community. You have to be at the chamber events, the networking events, and even calling on people that may need your service. Sometimes that's leads that the franchisor can help generate through online marketing and through direct mail marketing and other methods. But the owner probably has to get out of the house. Where they're saving their money is that they're not paying for an office or they're not paying for a storefront. Mm-hmm. But it's not home-based, in the way we used to see jobs in the back of magazines that said, make $10,000 a month filling out envelopes and never leaving your house.
Right.
If it looks too good to be true, it usually is.
Right. So when we started our conversation, we were talking a little bit about your steps to doing this. And a lot of it was corporate America just, giving you too many issues to challenges to go over. One thing you had mentioned was that it was a longer period of time between each job, which is still a proven research issue that keeps floating around in all of the literature that we get that says when an older adult does not get reemployed right away, it could be up to 2 years before they find a job. And it is hard. It gets harder and harder as you get older. So were there some things that you did to help you get to this point to be doing the FranNet work? And are there some steps that you think were really important? Networking, people you talk to, things that you may have done to kind of prepare you for what you're doing now?
Boy, I wish I could tell you that I went about this in a really smart way, but I can't.
We'd rather hear that because that's going to be a majority of our audience. Is that's the way they're approaching it? They think they're stumbling in the dark with this because there is no roadmap to get to that next place.
Right.
But there is a road to get there.
Yeah, and in my case, you mentioned that the literature talks about how with older workers, it's getting those periods of unemployment are getting longer. Couple of things. I also watched some of the job boards, and when we talk about older workers today, older worker can mean they can be in their early and mid 40s.
Oh, absolutely.
And all of a sudden, somebody 45 feels like they've peaked out and they're on a downward slope, and it's not 55 to 60 anymore. It might be 40, 45 years old. There's one company that we work with called ExecuNet that typically works with executives that have been six-figure and above salaries. And they tell us, much like you just said, that the average person is spending anywhere from 8 or 9 months to as much as 2 years finding a new job. And then the new job is lasting 22 to 26 months.
Right.
So if you're off work for even 1 year and then back on work for a year and a half or two, that is not a good cycle to be on.
No.
And
it's
in
constant
my case,
chaos, yeah.
And that's what I went through, spending down my savings, working for a year and a half and then being off work. And if I really averaged over probably my last 5 years, I was being paid a lot less if I wanted to look at that over the 5-year period. Mm-hmm. I took a pay cut. Two of the times that I found a job, I took pay cuts, and I justified that in my own mind and said, I just want to work, and I'll work my way back up to where I used to be. And before I could work my way back up, I was downsized again.
Right.
And usually through no fault of my own. In one case, it was a situation where I literally had a review, an annual review, got very high feedback, great feedback, and got a raise. And 2 weeks later was downsized.
Right.
They knew all along what was going on, but they weren't forthcoming about it. I think that, in my case, I kept kidding myself that, that there's going to be something else out there. And I probably could have stumbled around and found another job, but it might have been, the next one might have been 6 months. It lasted, or a year and a half. And, I've had that happen with clients of mine that go back to work and come back to me 2 years later. Now all of a sudden they're 58 or 60 and they know that their job prospects are less, and they're a little bit more worried about the business now, because this time they probably don't have a big severance. Maybe they got a severance package, but if they only went to work for a year or two in their new job, they probably get no severance that time. Mm-hmm. And now when they go to invest in a new business, instead of having a little extra money around from their severance package, they have to think about using their savings, and that makes it a lot harder.
Right.
So I haven't been very encouraging, but
well, I think number one, as Brett said, we need to be truthful. It's really not any different than somebody looking to make a career change into a new industry. We have folks who'll say, maybe, do I need to go back to school? I mean, all of those are important steps. And if you do your homework, you're going to just, you're going to be more successful whichever path you decide to take. So I think people need to hear that. One thing you just mentioned too, that I didn't think to ask you earlier, is in terms of those who are looking at franchises, who's more successful, men or women?
I've never seen numbers on that. I would say a couple things that are interesting is that women and minority ownership is growing, mm-hmm. but like a lot of other areas of business, it's been they've been underrepresented.
Right.
And
But
I think it is growing.
There is capital out there, though, for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses.
Yeah, there is. Sometimes there can be some misunderstandings. I would say that there's financing incentives. I would say that the government isn't giving away money, but maybe if it's a minority and for women, that there might be financing incentives in the way of a little discounted interest rate. Or once they're in business, there may be certain government contracts that are made available to women and minorities. But there are also folks that believe that there's just a bunch of government money waiting to help people start businesses. And for the most part, my colleagues at SBA and small business development centers tell me that is a misunderstanding. There isn't a lot of money out there.
Are those steps that you help individuals who are looking for a franchise through FranNet? Are those things that you give them information on who to talk to and where to get more information about that capital?
We do. And, it may sound funny to say this, but I think in a lot of ways I spend as much of my time talking people out of business ownership than into it. We start with an assessment that people can do online, and they get a 10-page report, and it's a business ownership assessment. It helps people to really make a decision themselves if they have the skill set and whether this is the right time for them to become a business owner. And I've had a lot of people get the report and make a decision at that time that, you know what, I'm not cut out for this. And I think that's a great decision.
Absolutely.
If they make that.
Absolutely.
So we do begin with an assessment, and then I generally will sit down with people, try to answer questions and ask them a lot of questions, usually for about 2 hours. And we have had zero discussion about any franchises up to that point. People need to really take the time to think about what they want to accomplish through business ownership. Is there family behind it? Because if they aren't on the same page, it will never happen. Probably won't surprise either of you, but when I have that discussion with men, very often they'll tell me, oh, no, don't worry about my wife being involved. This is my decision. She'll support whatever I want to do. And then I look at them and say, how long have you been married? And he'll tell me 30 years. And I'll say, well, you don't know your wife very well, do you?
There you go.
You cannot do this yourself. Yeah. When I ask women the same question, that you have to both be on board. Your husband or significant other must be completely with you and supportive. They'll look at me like, well, of course, I wouldn't do this. So I think there's still real differences, but it is so critical that the family, the spouse, and key decision makers are on board. And so I find that after spending a couple hours with people, they'll at least start to understand that this is not a hobby. You may love to bake cookies for your friends or gourmet meals for your friends, but that doesn't translate into you being a restaurateur. Or you may love golf, but that doesn't mean that you should own a pro shop. Right. You sometimes have to separate those hobbies from. They might not be fun anymore once it becomes a business.
Right.
Sometimes people are lucky enough to really find something that they love to do, and it can be a successful business. But many times, the most successful business owners are not people that have one specific idea. Rather, they're people that just love the idea of building a successful business that they are in control of, that it allows them to feel like they understand and control their financial future, and they can build that business to reflect their values, the way they want to treat people, the way they want to treat customers. But it might not be necessarily something that they love like a hobby. Somebody loves going out on the weekends and riding their bike, it doesn't mean that they necessarily should open a bike shop.
Right.
Because they're going to probably figure out, hey, wait, my bike shop's got to be open on the weekends.
And I can't go ride.
I can't go ride, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think you've brought up a lot of different ideas and different concepts, and actually the way to approach walking into this before even thinking about a specific franchise. So I think a lot of the things you just talked about may have spurred on some ideas from our listeners. What would be, the next step if they have an interest, would like to contact a person that can help them get to franchise, specifically you or overall? What's the next step for them to take?
Well, I'd love to talk to anybody that wants to have a conversation about it. There are a lot of folks in our field that are not locally based, and I would kind of warn people that I think there's a great advantage to working with somebody locally. I've met people who have begun to talk to a franchise consultant or specialist, whatever you want to call us, from out of state. And those people can provide some help, but I don't think that they have the vested interest. They're never going to sit down with you. Your success or failure doesn't really impact them in the same way. I live in Columbus. I'm going to run into these people. Hopefully I'm going to frequent their business. But beyond that, if they need help with financing, as Carol, as you asked, I can point them in the right direction. If they need an attorney that has experience in franchise law, which is different than general business law,
right.
I can make 2 or 3 or 4 recommendations so they can make a good decision. If they need a networking group, if they need a sign maker for their new shop, I can tell them, here's somebody I've worked with, and from my experience, they'll do a great job for you. The out-of-town franchise people, they just can't provide that level of service. So I love to talk to people. I welcome them to take the assessment. We work a lot like an executive recruiter, so there's no cost to a client for any of our services. If they find a business, and it typically takes 3, 4, 5 months of research, if they find something, then the franchise company compensates me for having brought them an experience or an informed and qualified candidate and helping guide them through the research process so that they're making a smart decision based on facts, not based on emotion or opinion.
That's great to know that there's not an initial cost to just go through those research steps. So.
Right. No cost for any of the services we provide. So again, typically it starts with a phone call, the online assessment, then usually we'll meet for 2 or 3 hours, and then I can begin to show them some concepts that seem to be a potential match based on what I've learned about them from our conversation and from the assessment, and they make a decision, is it interesting enough to learn more about it? And if they want to learn more about it, I connect them with the franchise company and kind of starts the process. So
Ted, if somebody's here in Central Ohio, what number should they call?
They can call me at 614-440-0038.
Okay. And if they're outside of Central Ohio, they can contact you and you can refer them on to someone else if that's not an area that you'll be able to help them with.
Right.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
Okay. Terrific. Ted, thank you so much for
thank
being
you.
with us
You're
today. This was a
welcome.
great opportunity to talk about something completely different, but a lot of our clients are asking, if I can't find a job, can I go to work for myself? So thank you again for being.
Thank you. I appreciate it.